Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here,
Yeah, I'm Bridget. Hello.
and this is number 235 in Sounding the Shallows.
Yes, it is. It's been a an odd week, really, hasn't it? Because everything is about Christmas. Everything is about excitement. All the adverts are telling us how cozy and wonderful being together is going to be at Christmas. But alongside all that is a really horrifying story. And I know some of you who listen are not in the UK, but I suspect you might have heard about this anyway.
You mean Sarah Sharif?
Well, yes, I'm a
Yeah.
10-year-old little girl uh, murdered by her father and maybe her stepmother as well. But I think there was something for me about the sequence of this, just apart from the horror of her injuries. There was something about the fact that she disappeared. She was at school and functioning quite well, although they were very worried about aspects of her. But she was taken out of school and just disappeared into this
In theory,
horror.
to homeschooling,
Yes.
and the school was going to monitor that, but
Yeah.
then it was holiday time, so it wasn't happening anyway.
Yeah.
But what was odd about all that, not odd, but bizarre, was that these two worlds that she knew, the only two worlds she knew, was school, which gave her so much that was wonderful,
Mm,
and home, which in the end caused the end of her life.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and someone actually said to me, why was she seem such a different person in school? I said, well, because at school she was allowed to be a happy little girl. And each day she moved from one environment to another
And then,
in one direction, thinking, oh, good, I'm going to that place where people are
yeah,
so nice to me.
yeah,
And then going home and thinking,
yeah.
I'm going home, I hope it'll be all right, and I hope they'll treat me
Yeah.
properly. I don't know.
I mean, there's been
Horrible.
a series, hasn't there, on television about what happened to the princes in the tower. And it was a little bit similar that they were seen around. They were taken into the tower, but they were living as princes. They were alive. They were playing. They were obviously
Being tutored.
being tutored, and then they disappeared from view,
That's right, yeah.
and they weren't seen anymore. There were no glimpses. So
Yeah.
whatever, and I mean, this whole series is about whether or not they were murdered and whatever happened. But um, it's that, the other thing that's coming through this week is more and more information about what happened under Assad
In Syria.
in Syria, discovering prisons, definitely torture. But then, I mean, you were saying, Adrian, about what happened with the Americans, where after Saddam Hussein, so it isn't just people
Abu
who you
Ghraib,
can,
yeah.
yeah, it's not, you can't put it down to
Well, we
people
talked
who,
about this a week or two ago. It's about people normally with small power
yeah,
suddenly being invested, in that case, I mean, invested with, well, actually, it's the same with this little girl, really. People who have incredible power over another
exactly,
human being and treat them appallingly. And it's something about the need to discover what it's like to be horribly in charge of somebody to the point
yeah.
where they are disposable in your life.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking as well because all these things are. I'm sure there are different ones will come into other people's minds, but I was thinking about Jesus, and when he went behind closed doors, he was led by the Roman soldiers, and this is a very civilized society. The Roman soldiers will have, on the whole, been very disciplined, but behind closed doors, Jesus became a sort of plaything.
I don't know if it was. And was it behind closed doors?
Well, I think it was. Yes, they
Yeah.
said he was taken, and that's where they mocked him. They put the cloak on him.
Or whatever it was, they treated
beat
him like a puppet
like a puppet.
that could be thrown around.
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying, like a plaything. So is it something to do with if that is your desire for a perpetrator, that if they're unchecked, they will move further and further and further into an unreachable darkness, and the very worst of them will take over. I mean, there's a lot of questions about, is there such a thing as evil?
Yeah. I don't. I don't know. The thing is, it can work either way, depending on what your intention is, can't it?
What
And
were you thinking about?
well, there are institutions that have actually worked very well, aren't there? Or there appear to be. I know one we'll talk about in a minute, but
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I mean, again, there's people I know listen to us who are not in the UK, but there's a series every year, isn't there, called the Reef Lectures, and they're always interesting. And this particular one is all about it's all about violence. And what is violence? Where does it come from? What is the stem that, etc., etc. And one of the lectures takes place in a prison called Grendon Prison, which is the only totally therapeutic prison.
what does that mean?
Well, I think it
Totally
means that
therapeutic.
they are experimenting, if you like, with whether you take people who have a history of violence
Mm.
and through having group work, through having opportunities for them to explore what's really gone on and why, what is the root of their violence,
Yeah.
with prison officers, but also doctors, also therapists and
So
psychiatrists.
they're locked into the prison.
They're locked into the prison, but it is, and I just heard one little bit from it today as I was driving along, in which this guy said, "I thought I'd ended up in a mad place." It was the opposite to punitive prison, and at first would have seemed like something really easy, but then realizing this was far from easy, because the encouragement was to finally take responsibility, find out how you have come to this point in your journey, and make a decision. And I mean, the results have been very, very positive.
In what way?
Well,
In
just
terms of reoffending?
yes,
or-
reoffending and maybe something more, Adrian, that you learnt years ago when you were running a secure unit, didn't you?
Mm. Yeah, I was helping to run it anyway. But it was an unusual experience because the I was in two. One was in Birmingham, which was a much a different style, really, of child coming in. There was more of an accent on crime there. Down in Sussex, there were children from all sorts of backgrounds. The thing they had in common, the reason that they were in a locked unit, was that they were likely to either abscond, to run away from an open one, or to become violent. Those were the main categories. But and everything in between those
and
two.
just for
Really.
1 second, that in this thing I heard on the radio, somebody was saying, why isn't there a Grendon prison, if you like, for women? Because you associate violence with men, but women are so often violent towards themselves.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that very, very often women end up in prison because they've been self-harming, either through drug abuse or through various other ways.
You can't go to prison for self-harming.
No, I don't mean you go to prison for self-harming, but through drug abuse and through, petty crime, loads of things. I'm not letting women off. I'm just saying that I thought that was interesting, because thinking about the girls that you had in your units, apart from one or two, they were abusing themselves as much as anybody else.
They seem to be on a fast course in which you learn that you are useless.
Yeah.
In comparison with the common view of what
violence is,
what a girl would be.
Yeah.
But one or two. I remember one girl who actually had never heard the word family and had no idea what that meant. But she, like all the others who came in, you walk through a door, a very heavy, lockable door, and suddenly you're in a very small world. There are 5 bedrooms, and you look around the sitting room, which is what you first walk into, and there's a little kitchen in the corner, and there would be at least 2-3 adults there, and in the immediate, they say to themselves, I don't know what this is, because I was told I was going into the secure, and it has got a locked door. They've locked the door on me, but it doesn't feel like a sort of prison-y place.
No, I mean, I think that the aim for you and for the other people working there was almost to offer sanctuary from their lives for a little while, wasn't it? You know, the
Yes, it was in a way,
expectation
yeah.
from the outside world.
It was sanctuary
that-
from yourself, really.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I was thinking, and expectation of others. A lot of the boys in particular, they wore those tenola boots, didn't they? And the more holes you had in your boots, the tougher you were.
I'm not quite sure how that equation
No,
works.
but it seemed to in their
there we are.
heads. And then you've got respite. Maybe that's a better word than
Well,
sanctuary.
the nearest I can get to it is like remember once when I had a small child, not there, but somewhere else, and kicking off, and being difficult. And I held that child and was very warm for that child. And I said, I said something very nice to the child about them, and then I said, I'm holding you now, and I'm not going to let you go until your behaviour changes enough for the other people who are around to be okay. And I wasn't forceful about it, but I was bigger than the child, so I was holding with my arms very carefully and saying, it's entirely your decision. You tell me what you want, because if you want to go out there, the way you're being has to change.
You're going to have to put your shoes on.
Yeah, if you want to stay here, you've got to. You'll be here for some time or a long time.
Yes,
but
I mean,
if you exchange the arms for the secure unit,
that's what I was just going to say.
The secure unit took them in, and said, "There's no way." Well, I don't want you to get out, but there's this is a place designed to hold you in, but we don't want you to be people who are being subjected to an aggressive act by others. We want you to have I think you said a sanctuary from the choices you had while you were outside. Now you're inside here. You do have space. It took a while for them to really believe this, of course. You have some space to say, who am I? How did I get like this? What did I do? How can I check? Can I change?
Yeah, which of course is what I'm learning about Grendon Prison, and it's worth Googling it and looking up at the sad thing is that this involves a huge amount of intense work, and I know there would be anybody working in a prison at one of the much bigger prisons who would say, well, chance will be a fine thing.
Yeah.
All I can do is try to control, because I don't have those options to be able to work with people and get to the roots. But I suppose the hope is that it will teach all sorts of people how you begin to help people to walk back from the darkness as opposed to walking further into the darkness, which is what we started by talking about, really. And I heard an expression today from one of these prisoners from Grendon, talking about abuse excuse. Now, I found that very interesting because, we both worked with children who had been in all sorts of ways, if you like, abused, maybe by neglect, maybe by violence, maybe by just misunderstanding, all sorts of things, really. And I think as young people working with them, we did excuse their behaviour because of the abuse that they'd suffered. And obviously that's important too, isn't it? But at the same time, there was a moment, ideally, when they can also see that the acting out of what they're doing, that somehow they have to take responsibility for it. And maybe all of us are like that. Maybe all of us can look back at our lives and think, well, I can understand why that happened. So, and a lot of the time we encourage ourselves and people to be kind to ourselves, don't we?
I think people are pretty agnostic. I mean, adults and children, quite agnostic about the possibility of change in themselves. And we were talking earlier about when I was a teenager and I was befriended by a couple who were in their 30s. I mean, I remember must be quite much
Old.
older than me. But then my relationship with them really did profoundly change my life. And it was because they treated me as someone who was worth being around them, to talk to listen to.
And you became that person.
Well, I became part of that person and tried to live up to being that person. For the kids coming into and prisoners coming into prison, I mean, kids coming into a secure unit, it's a thin line, you know. Depending on what you've got away with before, you're going to try your other ploys first, and then if people are stubbornly caring but firm, you have to suddenly deal with that. And I can remember at times, because sometimes we would take kids out under certain sort of secure conditions, and they would almost run back into the secure unit.
Well, and the other thing was, and this is crazy, but as you say, it was a very small, I don't know if I'd really say this, but it was a very small kitchen, wasn't it, in your secure unit? And when you did made toast, the fire alarm would go off. And
That's
so
right,
you needed to have the door of the kitchen open while making breakfast. And not one child, not one, escaped or tried to escape through that door.
There had to be an agreement.
They had to be an agreement.
They wouldn't run away while the toast
while
was
the
burning.
toast was burning, was not burning.
Was not burning.
I don't know.
One or two did run away. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't. Not only was it not perfect, it was a million miles from
Of course,
perfect.
but that was a fact.
What it did was it opened. I remember something C.S. Lewis said about when things change in your life, you go into a sort of hall, and there are doors on either side of the hall, and you have a choice of which door you're going to go through. And some look very unattractive because you don't think you'll ever succeed in the place you get to through there. But it's very hard. For me, with the couple I talked about, you know, I was such a lost idiot, really, and to have someone value me and to sit and look at me in the eyes and appear to value, value me.
They did value you, yes.
Yeah, they did. I'm not saying it was false, but
isn't it interesting that one of your very favourite poems is "Love Bade Me Welcome" by George Herbert, which I know we've talked about before, but that's the same thing, isn't it? Somebody feeling that they're not worthy to walk through the door.
Yeah,
and love trying to persuade them to come in. Yeah.
And then, I mean, that person eventually does agree to come in, but wants to go back to the old way of earning his place there.
Yeah.
And love says, no, just take it easy.
Sit down. Yeah.
Take it easy. And I do remember with great passion, no, not great passion, great excitement, children who suddenly saw a possibility of change in their lives. And it was very difficult politically because very often it was oral praise, but these institutions used to talk about having to consume their own smoke.
What the heck did that mean?
Well, it meant that in the county where the institution is,
right.
you have to have a facility they can be.
Which might not be suitable at all.
Yeah, and you've only got 3, say.
Yeah.
And none of them are suitable. Yeah. So it was very difficult because you would have this explosive change in culture. It's like a pocket culture, really, within the unit. And then you're out and you're having to start all over again in probably an open place. So it was never easy. But what you did have, and we've seen this, we met kids we worked with years ago, if you remember, who came to our door, they came to see us. And it was 20 years after. And they remembered the care. They may have done things since then that didn't look particularly promising, but it was a part of them. It was a part of their history.
They had a little period of time when they were affirmed. Yes, absolutely. But it is interesting because I remember the unit that you worked in where the aim was to get they were all teenagers, weren't they? And to try to get them adopted, which was a very tricky process.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you used to do, not just you, but the others working there, was to show the child their file, which was very unusual. Children in care have a locked file. I would say locked, but I mean, they don't see it. And it's the story of their lives. And you used to go right through it, which was a very painful thing for some of them. But every time you would say, this was not your fault. But then you would come to the point of saying, well, you're leaving here now. What are you going to do with that? Are you going to let that define you? Or are you going to try and start again? And loads of them didn't manage to start again very well. And there will be prisoners in Grendon Prison who do reoffend and things will go wrong. But that opportunity to get to know yourself, like you said, get to see the potential and possibilities and hope. I found that very exciting, and it was an interesting contrast with what happened to this little girl.
It's incredibly complicated. I remember, I don't know if we've told this story before, it's a quick story, but about a really charming girl, really teenager, not in the same one I've been talking about, but somewhere else, who was being physically hurt by one of her parents. And her parent came to the unit where she was. It wasn't a locked place. And I said to him, your daughter is really lovely. She's charming. Why would you want to hit her? And he said, well, that's what my father did with me, and I thought I'd do the same. So you're not even starting somewhere that you understand.
No, and we actually can't understand a culture where physical discipline is part of a particular culture. But so often it is reasoned, and even if one doesn't like the idea of it, it is accompanied by affection, it's accompanied by care. And in the case of this little girl, clearly it just got so that it was, I don't know what it was, because we can't go behind those closed doors, but we're told to pray for our enemies, and we've got to pray for them. At some point, some light comes into that darkness, because that's what we're talking about, isn't it? We're in Advent, light into darkness, and we've got to pray for that, however horrific the situation is.
It's an awkward area because at the moment most people don't want to pray for them, really.
No, but if Jesus could pray, if Jesus could on the cross, having been tortured, abused, and hung on a cross, if he can do it, it's worth at least allowing it into the far corners of our minds, I suppose. Sorry, this isn't very Christmassy, but I think it's a shocking week for many, many people. And that's without even beginning to think about all the other areas of the world.
Well, experience does suggest, I am convinced that, I remember saying to someone the other day that with each person there is a way. It's a way. It's not a religious way in the sense that it's fixed, but there is a way, and finding that is the great task. You can't just say a prayer or do something that will change someone forever. That maybe that happens sometimes, I don't know. But to see change, and to rescue people sometimes.
Well, we had some lovely emails this week all about to stay or not to stay, and maybe we'll look at those next week. But we'd also love to hear if there's anything that you react to what we've been talking about. And we'll talk to you again next week when it is nearly Christmas.
Oh, it is. It will be, won't it? Yeah. Okay.
Goodbye.